Mark. Mark, thanks very much, and congratulations on ICD and on this wonderful symposium. It has been it's been great, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. I'm glad that my wife Randy could come, who's here, but she's down there where it's cool. She'll make her way up here. She said she might walk out on me if it got too hot. So I'm very mindful that it's warm, and I'm mindful that you've had a lot of speeches. And I'm also mindful that Eurovision's on tonight, and so I'd better not take too long. I'll try to keep it brief. So, as you can tell from the subject, we're going to talk a little bit about American politics. And some of you will say, I don't care about American politics, or I don't like American politics. And I don't blame you for that at all. At our advisory board meeting today, and I won't say which one of my colleagues, but said, in bringing up American politics, said something to the effect that it matters because it affects U.S. foreign policy, and U.S. foreign policy affects all of us. And so it's that supposition upon which I base the talk this evening, that it does matter. And so I may be talking a little bit about some people that you may not be as familiar with in American politics, but I hope that the underlying message on soft power in particular and cultural diplomacy will come through to you. So when I was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1992, I succeeded a congressman who had been in for 26 years. And in 26 years, he boasted that he had never once voted for a foreign aid bill. Last November, a University of Maryland poll found that when asked to estimate how much of the U.S. federal budget goes to foreign aid, the median estimate was 25%. When asked how much they thought would be an appropriate amount for the U.S. to give in foreign aid, the median response was 10%. It's pretty generous. In fact, just 1% of the U.S. federal budget goes to foreign aid. If taken as a percentage of discretionary spending, it's only 2.6%. By discretionary spending, I mean everything that's not on autopilot on the U.S. budget. Not Medicare, not Medicaid, not Social Security, all those are entitlements. On the part that's left, the discretionary, it's only 2.6% goes to foreign aid. Poll after poll confirms this wild misperception about U.S. foreign aid. Frankly, I believe my predecessor, who didn't vote for foreign aid in 26 years, understood the value for potential humanitarianism and service in the national interest that resulted from foreign aid. But still, he voted against it. For 26 years, he voted against it. So I became the first Republican from Arkansas in decades to vote for U.S. foreign assistance. And as my wife Randy will tell you, it was not an easy vote. It was a bit controversial. Last month, when the United States House of Representatives negotiated with President Obama for an agreement to avert a government shutdown, they focused only on discretionary spending. They didn't touch Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. They talked only about discretionary spending. And over 20% of the spending cuts that were agreed upon came from the State Department and the Foreign Operations budget. These fairly dramatic cuts in soft power tools, such as foreign aid and diplomacy, caused Joseph Nye to declare that there was a war on soft power. 2 years before Barack Obama ran for president, he wrote of a more prudent use of military force and aligning our policies to help reduce poverty and violence around the world. Sounds like soft power. And so I posed this question: what happened in 2 years? What happened? What obstacles that were so intransigent? What hurdles that were so high? What difficulties so great that led from the optimism of 2008 and the policies that President Obama spoke of to reduce poverty and violence to what Nye's called a war on soft power? So what I'd like to do for the next 20 minutes, it will take maybe a few questions, is talk about the hurdles in the United States to the use of soft power. Hurdle number one, the misperceptions of what strength is. Often in the U.S., public perception of power evokes a certain swagger. Of course, in the case of George W. Bush, it was a cowboy swagger, but in general, a swagger. It is too often equated with military might or, to our point, hard power. A few statements by leading U.S. politicians will illustrate this. You may have never heard of Tim Pawlenty, but he's the governor of Minnesota. He's announced that he's going to run for president for the Republican nomination. And so he assailed President Obama. He said, "Mr. President, with bullies, might makes right. Strength makes them submit. We need to get tough with our enemies, not our friends. And Mr. President, stop apologizing for our country." Now, Pawlenty is clearly trying to appeal to the Republican base. We call that throwing red meat. He was throwing red meat. But it reveals something about how Americans perceive strength. Another GOP contender, Governor Mike Huckabee, who was the governor of my state of Arkansas, and he's a friend of mine, but he lashes out at President Obama by saying, "Theodore Roosevelt believed that the way to command respect was to speak softly and carry a big stick. Other presidents have chosen to speak loudly and carry a big stick. But this is the first president who believes you can command the respect of rogue nations by apologizing and throwing away the stick." He always could come up with a good line. But this, again, this attack, and I think, frankly, is pretty unconvincing after the killing of bin Laden and the use of the drones, the decisive actions that President Obama has taken. And even conservatives now probably would reject that. But my point is that these speech lines by both Pawlenty and Huckabee reveal an underlying misperception of strength. Now, the very term soft power in the minds of many Americans suggests weakness. In 2007, when Richard Armitage and Joseph Nye co-chaired a commission of members of Congress and other leaders with the purpose of, quote, moving the United States from exporting fear to inspiring optimism, they did not call their new commission the Bipartisan Soft Power Commission. They called it the Bipartisan Smart Power Commission because they realized that the term soft in American think conveys weakness or evokes weakness. This, I suggest, was a concession to the reality of Americans' perception of strength. Hillary Clinton speaks of the importance of smart power, the merging of traditional hard power, military might, with soft power tools, foreign assistance, diplomacy, and educational exchange programs. Ken Edelman, the former Reagan administration official and ambassador to the United Nations, in an article he called "Not So Smart Power," ridicules soft power. He says, quote, "Besides resting on soft assumptions, emphasis upon soft power may lead to soft thinking." Now, I use that quote, the antipathy to the tools of soft power, may be most characteristic of the right, or the Republicans, or the conservatives, but the general perception of, or misperception of strength is a more generalized American trait and poses an enduring obstacle to the effective use of soft power by the United States. Soft power is weak. Pawlenty says, "The good of our national security policy should not be for the U.S. to be popular. The goal should be to make sure our country is safe and respected," end quote. Now, thoughtful conservatives, I hope I'm in that category, but thoughtful conservatives, beyond the heat of political campaigns, will often recognize the limits of hard power. Newt Gingrich, who, by the way, you may have heard of, the former Speaker of the House, and he has, I think, already announced for president, he's formed an exploratory committee for sure, planning his race for the White House. This is what he wrote. "Our leaders have overemphasized the military and underemphasized the intellectual, political, diplomatic, and economic components of winning." Stated another way, Gingrich is saying we've overemphasized hard power and we've underemphasized soft power. Mitt Romney, the former governor of Massachusetts, he ran for president before. Everybody expects he's going to run for president again. He addressed the misperception or the perception of strength obstacle when he said, quote, "There should be no misunderstanding of the fact that soft power is real power, that it can and does affect world events." So, while I gave you a whole bunch of examples of American politicians who dismiss and ridicule the idea of soft power, even conservatives in a non-political setting, in a book or in a thoughtful speech, will say that soft power is real power. It matters. And that there's been an overemphasis upon hard power and underemphasis upon soft power. First obstacle, misperception of what strength really is. Secondly, I would suggest that just as misperceptions of what constitutes national strength impedes the effective use of soft power, so does American power politics. Now, this is true at several levels. The unending political campaign cycle leaves little time for defying conventional political wisdom and popular positions. The insatiable appetite of the 24-hour news cycle demands ever more partisan and polarizing rhetoric, and the isolationist strain in American politics argues against American engagement in the world. President Obama recognized this when he wrote, "The impulse to withdraw from the world remains a strong undercurrent in both political parties." The president was absolutely right. It does exist in both political parties. But the isolationist tendency in the Democratic Party is usually evidenced by opposition to military interventions. That goes way back. Joe Kennedy in World War II, and the American population as a whole resistant of getting into World War II until Pearl Harbor. There was this isolationist strain. Hence, we see growing opposition today to the U.S. Afghanistan exercise of hard power. So usually on the Democratic Party side, at least in my opinion, we see this in resistance to the isolationist tendency and resistance to going out and getting involved in a lot of interventions with hard power. In the Republican Party, the isolationist tendency is more likely to be evidenced broadly. Going back to Taft, Lodge, there's this strain of republicanism that is very isolationist. And we see it today in the Tea Party. The freshman Republican senators that were elected in this last election reveal a split in the Republican Party and the GOP between the more isolationist Tea Party and the more interventionist traditional Republicans. 3 Republican freshmen have supported eliminating all foreign aid and opposed America's and NATO's Libyan mission. Those Tea Party isolationists are Rand Paul of Kentucky, Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, and Mike Lee of Utah. I don't mind mentioning their name because they're probably proud of the fact that they are isolationists. On the other hand, 3 Republican freshman senators have broken with the Tea Party on foreign policy. They have called for tougher sanctions, more U.S. involvement worldwide, and quick ratification of pending free trade agreements. So, first obstacle is misperceptions of what strength is. Second obstacle is American power politics, the constant campaign. The third obstacle to the United States' use of soft power is the inefficiency of delivery vehicles. We've all seen pictures of crates stacked high with bags of rice and other foodstuffs sitting untouched at a port of entry somewhere while a few miles away thousands of people are going without food and are starving. The problem is that the recipient country has no distribution system, so there it sits. Similarly, the U.S. can and often does have the best of intentions and commitment of sufficient resources of soft power, but if the delivery systems, the delivery vehicles are broken or dysfunctional, the soft power will fail. So let me quote Mitt Romney again. He observes that quote, America consistently underperforms its soft power potential. He provides numerous examples of U.S. failure to effectively harness its soft power. For example, with the U.S. economy twice the size of China and China in large measure dependent on unfettered access to U.S. markets, the U.S. has been unable to deter China from its financial support of Sudan, nor to enlist China in backing strong sanctions against Iran. Another failure, he mentions, is in Colombia, South America. It is arguably the strongest American ally in the region, a democracy, a vibrant trading partner, and a co-combatant against the international illegal drug trade. But in spite of this, they're an ally, they're a democracy, they're with us on fighting illegal drugs. The U.S. Congress has failed to date to ratify a long-negotiated free trade agreement with Colombia, and in so doing, and in failing to ratify that, we have failed to utilize the vehicles of soft power, and the U.S. has diminished its influence in the region and strengthened the self-proclaimed enemy of the United States, Hugo Chavez. Americans make up just 4.5% of the world's population, and yet Americans donate 12% of global foreign aid. Now that's pretty amazing. This demonstrable generosity has often failed to translate into persuasive soft power. Another example that Romney gives is Lebanon. Observers of the Middle East expressed surprise when Hezbollah garnered so much popular support among the Lebanese people. Hezbollah was launching rockets into Lebanese neighborhoods, causing those neighborhoods to be prime targets for Israeli retaliation. Yet, many Lebanese supported Hezbollah, including most Shia, providing shelter and logistical support. Much of this support flowed from deep-seated anti-Israeli feelings, admittedly, but much of it was the result of Hezbollah's humanitarian services to help the Shia community. They built schools. They built health clinics, which resulted in a reservoir of goodwill. Romney explains that if an official in the U.S. wanted to secure funds for schools and clinics, good luck. He or she would need to navigate the complexities of American bureaucracy and then navigate the complexities of American procurement law. This time-consuming process, if ever successful, would be so long in coming that Hezbollah would be firmly entrenched in the meantime. So soft power is real power. Not only does Hezbollah know this, but the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. But it's got to be delivered effectively. Another example of U.S. inefficiency in deploying soft power is in Latin America. Go anywhere in that region and ask people if they have heard of Operation Miracle. And the likely response is a resounding yes. It is the Cuban government's program to provide free cataract surgery. While the U.S. spends many times more than Cuba on humanitarian aid, it is with far less soft power impact. Why? Why does Cuba give a little bit of money to Operation Miracle, provide free cataract surgery, and they get this dramatic public relations victory while the United States spends many, many times? Well, I'd suggest that the tools, the delivery vehicles, are very, very ineffective. Cuba has successfully branded and promoted its aid, and therefore it's been effective. U.S. delivery vehicles for soft power include USAID, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Education, the Department of Defense, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Energy, and various agencies of the United Nations. Now, these various vehicles of delivery of soft power are often like stovepipes. None are coordinated. They're all operating their own bureaucracies and their own formulas. They have little coordination and little accountability, and thus they are very often inefficient projectors of American soft power. Now, I've kind of researched this. Romney, and I'm not for anybody in particular for president. I'm trying to be fair and objective on President Obama and all of them that want to run against him. But Romney is the only presidential aspirant to address the issue of soft power at any length at all. Most of them, you will never hear them use the word. He proposes to address American soft power inefficiencies and ineffectiveness by establishing, quote, special presidential envoys. These envoys would be responsible for soft power initiatives in the various regions of the world. These regional envoys would be given authority and commensurate accountability to marshal all the soft power resources of the United States government. His or her region would be roughly parallel to the U.S. Department of Defense Regional Command. So defense figured that's out a long time ago, divide the world up into regions, put a commander in charge, make that commander accountable. Romney's saying that's what we ought to do when it comes to soft power. Put one person cutting across all the various departments and agencies that are our current vehicles of delivery for soft power, and make them, give them authority, but also make them accountable. His or her authority would cut across these departments and agencies, and their accountability would be measured by defined metrics. The envoy's, quote, the envoy's sole mission would be to exercise soft power throughout their region. The fourth obstacle. The fourth obstacle to effective use of American soft power involves what I call American parochialism. Now, I could probably get my hackles up if you talked about American parochialism, but I'm an American, I can talk about it, and more than that, I'm from Arkansas, so I can sure talk about being parochial. When I was elected to the United States House of Representatives, I am embarrassed and ashamed to admit it, I had only visited one foreign country, and that was Haiti. There is a kind of parochialism. By the way, I think my experience was probably more typical of a member of the House of Representatives than atypical. There were more in my situation than had been world travelers. So there is a parochialism which characterizes much of the U.S. heartland and which is reflected in the makeup of the U.S. Congress. It is a real obstacle to the exercise of soft power. Listen to this, one newly elected United States Senator, I'll not mention his name, proudly announced that he had never been to Washington, D.C., much less a foreign country. Now, some would argue Washington, D.C. is a foreign country, but he had never even been to the nation's capital. So congressional travel, which usually gets characterized as being junkets, is actually very, very valuable in the exposure of members of Congress and senators to cultures, ideas, and viewpoints which prove invaluable in the development of public policy. There's one senator, I'll not mention his name either, he proudly said that his foreign policy ended at the banks of the Mississippi River. Now, he wasn't serious when he said that, but it played very well back in the constituency that he had. People liked that, unfortunately. My own experience with the Interparliamentary Union conferences broadened and deepened my own appreciation for soft power and for cultural diplomacy. I was visiting, I believe it was with one of our colleagues, but who mentioned, my memory will fail me, but mentioned that when American CODELs, that is congressional delegations, when they make these foreign trips, so often they will visit with military leadership or the executive branch, the president, the premier, that they rarely do these interparliamentary meetings, which he believed, I believe, would be far more productive in breaking down these barriers to the delivery of soft power. So we have these hurdles in the U.S. to the effective use of soft power. Misperceptions of what strength is, American power politics, that is the need to appear tough. Thirdly, inefficiency of tools of soft power. And fourthly, parochialism, a kind of narrowness of thinking. When earlier I mentioned U.S. vehicles of soft power, I included along with State Department, USAID, HHS, I mentioned the Department of Defense. Richard Holbrooke wrote, "Few Americans realized how deeply the military is now involved in American foreign policy." He's right. Remember when I was in the Senate and General Shinseki, who is now the Secretary of Veterans Affairs of the United States, but at that time he was the commanding general in the Bosnia operation and an amazing human being and a great, great American. General Shinseki came in and visited with me about Bosnia, and he talked about the building of roads, the building of schools. What he was really saying, this is a United States military commander, but he was talking about exercising soft power. Dana Priest, the author of the book called The Mission, says of the military's evolving role during the Clinton years, She writes, quote, implicitly, the Pentagon leadership realized it was no longer enough to fight and win the nation's wars, as the military wished its only job to be. The military would have to do more. There was no one else. Neither the President nor Congress was even making a strong case for a civilian substitute. In other words, the Pentagon became the primary vehicle for the delivery of soft power. Now, that may rub you the wrong way, but that's the way this has evolved. When George W. Bush ran for president, he declared we would no longer use our military for nation building. And then came Afghanistan. Spending on diplomacy in the United States declined for decades. The State Department budget decreased 20% in the 70s and the 80s, while defense was going up. But one consequence of this has been a new understanding at the Department of Defense and among our regional commanders that soft power is important, even essential. So Secretary Robert Gates, the Secretary of Defense, went before Congress and testified for the need to increase the budget at the Department of State. While he was cutting $80 billion out of the Department of Defense budget, he goes and testifies we need to put more money into state because he recognized the great need for soft power. So and I'll conclude with this, when John F. Kennedy was running for president, he had a rally at the University of Michigan. 10,000 students showed up. He asked them, how many of you who are going to be doctors are willing to spend your days in Ghana? How many of you who are going to be technicians or engineers are willing to work in the Foreign Service? It was a short speech, and after the speech was over, a petition was signed by over 1,000 students telling, at that time, Senator Kennedy they were willing to go and serve. That rally at the University of Michigan became the impetus for the creation, as you know, of the Peace Corps. This response inspired him, and so he made it one of his major initiatives. I believe that this has been one of America's great soft power efforts. His brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, who became the first director of the Peace Corps and who passed away at the age of 91 this year. Sergeant Shriver, in 1967, only a few years after the Peace Corps started, made a commencement address, and he summed up, I think, his own legacy. He said, and I quote, "The way to stop war is not to condemn the soldier,